After Vice President Kamala Harris was interviewed by Bret Baier of the Fox Propaganda Network, top Trump ally and Fox propagandist Sean Hannity had his heart broken on his very own show when Bret Baier himself publicly praised the vice president and confirmed that she accomplished her mission. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, we have several clips to talk about in this video. Again, this is kind of a follow-up to the first video we did today, which is that Vice President Harris was interviewed by Bret Baier of the Fox Propaganda Network. We've covered, obviously, the analysis of that, the fact that Bret Baier, despite having the sheen, the veneer of a straight news journalist who's not biased at all, he's actually a conservative Trump supporter who wants to make decisions based on what will increase or at least maintain viewer share on Fox. Okay. But with that in mind, Sean Hannity asked Bret Baier about the conversation he had with the vice president. And I think Bret Baier threw him for a loop with his answer.
She left. How was her campaign? How was she to you when she left?
Yeah, I mean, it's cordial. And I said, thank you so much, Madam Vice President, for the time. She said, thank you. Her people, like probably 4 people, were wrapping me, with big, moving arms. That's why I looked out to the side and said, yeah. I've got to wrap up. You want to keep talking, you want to keep asking questions, but they were very animated. And listen, I hope she comes back. I actually think this is a different take. I think she had a mission that she wanted to do, and maybe she wanted to have a viral moment. She wanted to have a pushback. She came to Fox News and she wanted to have a go after Donald Trump viral moment that plays on a lot of other channels and on social media. And I think she may have gotten that. I think in the interim, we had a good exchange. I wish it wasn't so much filibuster. I wish it was just a cordial conversation about policy and follow-ups. Maybe if we had more time, maybe she'll come back. I don't know. I don't know if she will or not, but I hope she does. And obviously, I hope the former president does the same format.
She left.
So again, also pointing out that there at the end, that Donald Trump will not do that follow-up with Bret Baier. Famously, they had an exchange last year in which Bret Baier, even though it was much more of a softball interview than the one he gave the vice president, did throw a hardball every now and then, and one went viral. We recently covered about all of the many former high-ranking Trump supporters and members of the Trump administration who have since come out and publicly opposed Donald Trump or condemned Donald Trump or are withholding their support from Donald Trump. And Donald Trump did not like that question at all. And he has apparently been very critical of Bret Baier. I imagine Bret Baier is hoping to get back in Trump's good graces with the ruthless interview he conducted against the vice president. But the other important thing to remember is that Bret Baier is acknowledging that the vice president did well. Now, he says there was filibuster. I would argue that he was also interrupting and heckling and hectoring and not allowing the vice president to have, a fully developed answer. And so there was a lot of time wasted in that respect as well. I wonder if he would do the same to Donald Trump when Donald Trump, quote unquote, filibusters. Again, we may never know because Bret Baier may never have the opportunity to interview Donald Trump again because Trump has certainly shied away from him after that disastrous interview last year and even objected to the idea of Bret Baier moderating a Fox-hosted debate between Trump and Vice President Harris. So if nothing else, you can say that the vice president is much braver than Donald Trump is. But again, praise from the man who actually conducted the interview. There was also some other select, scant praise of Vice President Harris from other Fox News personalities. Here is Brit Hume offering a rare word of encouragement and support.
Well, she was combative and energetic, and she certainly landed some blows on Donald Trump.
And again, just getting those few words out of Brit Hume's mouth is rare indeed. Obviously, he had a lot of criticisms, a lot of complaints. He doesn't like Vice President Harris. He doesn't like the Democrats. He's a conservative Republican. Again, same thing here. Dana Perino, conservative Republican, former press secretary for President George W. Bush, again, had a rare, brief moment of praise for the vice president.
At times, especially when she was trying to go after Donald Trump, she was fairly effective in that. To try to get her point.
So again, she was fairly effective at trying to get her point across to attack Donald Trump. I know it might not seem like much, but the fact that these Fox hosts are publicly praising the vice president at a time when Donald Trump is so upset with Fox and at a in a political season where insufficient loyalty to Donald Trump is potentially a political or media death blow, right? If you're in the right-wing orbit, that says something. Was it a perfect interview? No. Were there times that it seemed that the vice president fumbled over words? Of course, but anybody can do that. There are very few, expert communicators who are just so damn good that they almost never fumble over their words. Pete Buttigieg is one of those communicators. He is the current transportation secretary under President Biden and Vice President Harris. He is a surrogate for the Harris campaign. And given that he is perhaps the best communicator in the Democratic Party, or at least certainly one of them, and a surrogate for Harris, and somebody who routinely spars with Fox, it might be important to hear what Pete Buttigieg has to say about the vice president's performance.
I will say is that, one principle I try to remember that I thought she demonstrated is making sure not to allow them to kind of change the subject or the framing of the question at hand, right? The whole topic there was the fact that a candidate for president and a former U.S. president described the American people, the ones he disagreed with, as the enemy. And it's really important not to allow some sidestepping of that. So, she did that. She also made sure to continue to get her point across, even when she was being repeatedly interrupted. As somebody who has a lot of batting practice myself on that network, really proud of how she represented her views, her values, and this ticket in front of a conservative audience. Something I might add, by the way, that is a show of strength. That is the exact opposite of the weakness that Donald Trump has demonstrated by pulling out of going even on CNBC, which is hardly a liberal bastion, or 60 Minutes, where it's customary for both candidates to go on. He's not prepared to go in front of a skeptical, let alone unfriendly audience. She demonstrated the opposite. And remember, this is in keeping with her continued outreach to conservatives. Look at the difference between her making clear that she would include Republicans in her cabinet, campaigning with so many Republicans, principal Republicans, who are for her, versus him referring to Democrats as the enemy.
So it's interesting. I mean, again, great points all around by Secretary Buttigieg. Again, one of the finest communicators and debaters in the Democratic Party, certainly more than a match for anybody on the right at Fox News. Again, publicly praising the moxie, the courage. And it was a risk, right? You have to remember, because, we're 3 weeks away from the election, Donald Trump has refused another debate. There are going to be no more, unless something dramatic changes, unless Taylor Swift decides to have some sort of concert and drag Kamala Harris on stage, or they sing some sort of duet, perhaps Red, one of my favorites of Taylor Swift. There are going to be no more big moments. And so this Fox News interview may be the biggest high-profile moment left in the arsenal, unless the vice president is somehow able to secure an interview on Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan has indicated that he would not be conducting political interviews, but Donald Trump has signaled that he will have an interview with Joe Rogan. I have to imagine if Rogan agrees to interview Trump and Harris wants to be interviewed by Rogan, he would interview her. But it's also possible, given there's no way to compel him, that Rogan, who is more sympathetic to Trump, generally speaking, would interview Trump, give him a softball, decline to interview the vice president, and put them at an asymmetric disadvantage. But the bottom line is, you've got to take these moments, or rather, you have to recognize that these big moments are increasingly rare. And so this Fox News interview may be the biggest opportunity for the vice president to make a splash. She's also taking risks, right? She's trying to do everything in her power in such a marginally close election to break free, to expand her ceiling, because her ceiling has greater potential than Donald Trump's. Donald Trump's support really isn't increasing to a statistically meaningful way. His ceiling is capped. Her ability, her potential to recruit an anti-Trump coalition is greater than his ability to recruit a pro-Trump coalition. It's very unlikely, even now, even if he wins the presidency, that Trump wins the popular vote, right? He is always more unpopular than popular. She's the one who's trying to make these moves. I thought it was very high stakes. I also said at the beginning, I wasn't sure if I were an advisor to the vice president, if I would have advised her to do this, because Fox News, somebody said on Twitter, 787 million reasons to not give Fox News the time of day. They're not just a partisan enterprise, right? I don't believe in so-called unbiased mainstream media. I think that every journalist, every political reporter have their biases. Now, you have to engage in journalistic discipline. You have to try to, be as disciplined as possible. But I don't believe that reporters and journalists are androids. The problem is Fox isn't merely partisan the way that MSNBC is. They're partisan in the sense that they defamed Dominion voting systems and had to pay $787 million to avoid a costly and perhaps, disastrous trial for them. And the lies that went into the Dominion voting system case were about Donald Trump's 2020 election defeat. They signal boosted lies that he won the election knowingly. So they effectively paid nearly $800 million as a loyalty tithe to Donald Trump. That's how loyal they are to Trump. So it wasn't like you were just walking into, it's not like you were being interviewed by the Wall Street Journal or maybe even the New York Post. You were being interviewed by Fox, even though they all have an incestuous relationship. It wasn't just right-wing media. And she did very well, despite that, despite the risk, despite how bad faith Fox was and how bad faith Fox was during the interview, because Bret Baier went hard on her in a way he never has for Trump, even though he has thrown Trump hardball questions in the past. There was a clear partisan mission by Baier. And she did well, all things considered. So I don't think it's going to have a colossal impact on the outcome of the election, but anything that could move the needle or perhaps win over Republican voters is great. Of course, we also have to make sure that we're not driving away our leftward flank. So that's the balancing act, unfortunately, that a Democratic candidate has in 2024, whereas Donald Trump seems perfectly content to just try to appeal to his base and hope for the best. But anyway, food for thought. And in the meantime, let me know what you think in the comments.